All right, so it is 2 o'clock now, and I want to welcome everybody to this training session. This is about play and diversity and inclusion, and promoting and generating inclusion inside our libraries through library activity. Our special guests today are Jill Wood from the Parish School in Houston, Texas, and Montana Rindahl, the children's librarian at the Mammen Family Public Library in Bulverde, Texas, right north of San Antonio. I'm Joel Bangilan. I'm with the Holocaust Museum Houston, and I'm the former chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the CSLP. And this is one of the things that we wanted to do is create a rich environment for us to learn about in diversity and inclusion and a multicultural society that we're trying to build, and appreciate everybody. We are talking about the inclusion of kids who may have developmental, physical, or cognitive disabilities or challenges. And I just wanted to also remind everybody, this is being recorded, so please be sure, be aware that it is going on record, and that we'll try to answer any questions. At the 45-minute mark, we'll try to answer questions from the audience. If you will put them into the chat, we can do that. And if you're new to the CSLP, it's a great experience if you get a chance to volunteer for it. And I encourage that and participate with your state library and your state to use the CSLP materials and to access many of its resources. So let's go on with this. Oh. So play, it has a place in libraries, and you might kind of think, why do we want to do this? What are some of this has to be more valuable than the litigation that might occur from someone's injury. I want to just say that don't let that scare you from providing these kinds of programs. Play has a place in learning. It's the job of kids. And that's why we also use the term play work, because this is the work that they are supposed to be doing. Not only does it have physical development, but it has cognitive development benefits, emotional development benefits, and social development. The kids are interacting with each other, interacting with their environment, and learning about things with both gross motor functions and fine motor functions, and then cooperation and even intergenerational interactions. And it's a great way to start including kids who might be delayed in some way in any of those areas. Such a broad range of inclusion can happen, and such a broad range of participation can happen. So here's a few bits of information about it. The kids are constructing their own learning environment. They're learning their own experience, and that's kind of where libraries are. We are supporting self-directed learning and child-centered learning, and this allows to deploy some constructivist and constructivism ideas in the learning at the library. So I'm going to let Jill talk about what Playwork is.
Yes, thank you, Joel. The field of Playwork was actually created at the beginning of the 20th century, and it was created on adventure playgrounds in London. And adventure playgrounds are child-directed play spaces with loose parts, and I'll talk about those in a minute, where kids are sort of in charge of their own play, and they can affect the environment. They have agency within the environment. And I think that's really important when we're talking about play. There are all different kinds of ways that professionals use the term play. But in this context, what we're talking about are experiences that children have some agency within, where they have some control over what they're making, how they're making it. And of course, this is what makes it so flexible and so inclusive, is because when we have that flexibility, children can meet themselves where they are. And that's super important. In Playwork, it's a really unique field. Because the goal is to let children take the lead and to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how we can help without disrupting. So I think something that can be really tricky is when we're, as librarians, when we are working with kids in our programs, we want to give them that sense of agency, but at the same time, there are other things we need to be tending to. And so a lot of what play workers will do, and what I'll use in my library through my Playwork training, is just reflecting on, do I need to jump in? Do I need to direct the kids in what they're doing? Or can I let them sort of go free at this moment? And the goal is to not be judgmental about their play. And again, this is another piece of how Playwork in libraries helps with inclusion, is that children, if they're making the things they need to make therapeutically or otherwise as a part of their learning experience, it probably won't look the same as what we might expect it to. So it's super important to sort of hold back and try and hold back our judgment and our expectations as much as we can. And that can only happen through reflection.
Montana, would you like to say anything about Playwork and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I will say I have learned everything I know about Playwork from Jill. I just totally was like already on board with the concept before I knew that it had a name. So I would say our programs are less, the program I do at my library is very similar to this, but what I love about it in conjunction with libraries is that, like, in a way that like Playwork gives children agency, like that's what we're also doing when kids come in, especially as children's librarians. Like, a library is one place where they have agency about like what they're going to take home with them. Like, they're choosing what books they're reading and why they want to read them, in the same way that like when they're playing, they're choosing what they want to play with and how they want to play with it. So these two models are so joined together to me as like what we as librarians are all about.
So well said. Yes.
It kind of also eliminates the need for a volunteer pre-cutting shapes for you, because the kids will create the shapes that they need. So
absolutely,
let's take a look at some of the photos that we have on our on our slideshow. So you talk about loose parts, Jill. Would you give us a little bit more explanation about that too?
Sure. So loose parts is a concept, and it's getting used more and more in education. And the idea is that it was created by a landscape architect named Simon Nicholson, and it refers to materials and supplies that don't have a predetermined purpose. So the idea is we supply the materials and the kids decide what they become. One of my favorite definitions of loose parts is from another play worker who says, the best loose part is that when it's broken in half, you have two. So the idea is that they should be non-precious. And this is so important because that gives us the freedom to let children do what they need to do with them. If they're expensive, I personally, if I have expensive materials, I feel really differently about how the children use them. So these are things from your recycle bin. They're things that you get donations from if you go to your Home Depot and ask for, a refrigerator box, or these are things that are not precious and should be inexpensive and or free for all of you, and really flexible. So they could be used for most anything a child might dream up. And I think like when I think about loose parts and I think about play work, I probably the way that this most meets children's needs, no matter what their disability or not, is that it's an extremely flexible approach. And that's what libraries are, really. That's what we're good at. We are good at figuring out what our patrons need, when they need them, and figuring out how to make do with what we have, right? Without having to go buy a bunch of stuff. So I think that when we think about inclusion, that combination of not being judgmental about the children's work, but also having our materials and our expectations be super flexible, lets children make what they need to make. And when we help them, the most important thing, particularly with children with my school is a school that's specifically for children with developmental disabilities, that we make sure and listen to what it is that they're wanting to do. It might take a little longer for them to express exactly what that need is or what that desire is. But once we can figure that out and work with them, then we can help them make that a reality. And in this picture, there was a boy who was wanting to blow a ping pong ball around on the surface of a table, and it kept falling off, which was really frustrating to him because it was hard for him to go and pick things up. And so we had these, materials you can see, we just made bumpers on the side of the table to keep them from. So we figured out what he wanted to do, and then we figured out how to make it work, because our materials were super flexible.
And libraries are perfect for loose parts, because if yours is anything like mine, you have people wanting to donate random boxes of things to you all the time. So you probably have a bunch of loose parts in your supply closet if you're anything like my library.
So true.
And yeah, okay, these are my kids. So the program that I did at my library, this was before COVID, the year right before we shut down, and like the 9 months of the school year, right before. We did a lot of play, but we also did a lot of outdoor, like nature and gardening type of stuff. So our kids ranged in age from 4 to 10 years old, and they grew radishes from like start to finish. That's what this picture is. So they all they did as much as they could. Like some of them had much neater beds than others. Some of them just kind of like threw their seeds in haphazardly, but they all grew. They all watered them and they all grew. And they harvested them. I think I have some pictures, Joel, of them. Yeah. And then I let them eat them. And they have done everything themselves. So even when we were doing more structured activities of like, we did this over the course of maybe like 6 weeks. I think it took these radishes to grow, where they had to plant them and then water them and weed them and then harvest them. Like the kids still had to do everything. It was very child directed. We had a couple of adult volunteers, but like they took them in, they dug them out of the earth, they took them inside, they washed them, and they actually even cut the tops off and cut them into slices, and then they got to eat them as a snack, which they were really into, actually. But I was like, the adults are here to help you if you need help, but I expected them to do it. And they're totally capable. I mean, they really went to town. They loved it. Yeah, we had the little bins outside. This is another project we did. They did have a bigger goal of creating an obstacle course for each other. One time it was like really bad weather, so we were playing inside. But I was very similar, like I just gave them a bunch of things we had in our games closet, random supplies and toys and ropes and balls and whatever. And I was like, okay, each kid has to make one challenge, and we're gonna put all the challenges together into one obstacle course. And they did awesome. They all just like set to work in like 20 minutes. They had each done their own little part of an obstacle course. And this was the same thing. It ended up being flexible, that I think the youngest kid who did it was like 3, and the oldest kid who did it was 10. And they made it work for each other, which was awesome. Yeah, and they were really into cheering each other on. They were very excited.
Montana, I feel like that is so important, that multi-age can be really helpful to these open-ended programs, because every one of the setups that Joel and I did, we would see older kids kind of helping younger kids. And I think that relationship and that dynamic is really helpful.
Absolutely. And what was really cool, I loved including those pictures of the kids being like cheering each other on like that, because it obviously took the 3-year-old much longer to go through the whole course than it did the 10-year-old. And like different kids struggled with different parts of it based on like who maybe had like better practice on a balance beam than another kid, or who was more nervous about going quickly in one area. And so it was really nice to see them all supporting each other and like recognizing that they had different strengths, and that was okay because it was still fun for everyone participating. So yeah, this is some other projects we did. They all got to make their own hats. Again, everything we did is like, it had like a big umbrella structure, but then within it, we kind of just gave them the pieces and let them do what they wanted. So we talked about what a plant needs to live, like sun, soil, water, and air. And then they got to make their own hats out of newspaper with different pieces of, they could draw things or they could make things out of pipe cleaners. We even had like clay. Some kids put sculptures on top of their hats that were representing the different things that a plant needs to live. And then sometimes they just played outside. This little girl with those scooters, she had turned that into a stable for horses. So that's what's going on down there. And we did yoga inside too. That was just like another random day of bad weather where I was like, new plan, everyone's still inside, it's raining. Oh yeah, we've been on a lot of nature walks. We have a butterfly garden at our library, which is really nice. And so this was the same thing. I think probably the youngest kid, these were all more close to the same. Probably the youngest kid was 4 and the oldest kid was 8, but they all made binoculars out of toilet paper tubes. And then we went for a little hike around our library and they got to tell me what they noticed. More things they grew. They grew a lot of herbs. We did hydroponic gardening out of a water bottle one time, which was really fun. And the master gardeners actually helped us with a bunch of this. They did like seed. It was like a seed ball, wildflower seeds. So that's more just outside projects. And then we did this twice in a row, 2 different years. So pictures are from 2 different times where they got to make an herb wreath. So the kids could make their individual part however they wanted, like a little bundle of different herbs. And the master gardeners came and told them like all the different herbs were and had them smell them differently and like talk about what foods they could be used in. And then they put them all together into one big wreath. So still like a collaborative project.
Montana's kind of lucky because rosemary and lavender grow around Bulverde very wildly. And
Yeah.
so there are a lot of natural resources that you could take access of.
Well, and I think even in the picture before, we had the kids actually grew cilantro. Like we grew radishes one time and we grew cilantro. So they actually like harvested it and then put some of that in their wreath too. So yeah, we stay real busy. They made bee hotels or any pollinator really, just like if the bee is flying far from its hive, it needs a place to rest. So it's just a water bottle and like rolled paper. But again, this is something like we've made them do everything, like 5-year-olds to 10-year-olds, like they cut their water bottle, they cut their paper, they rolled it up, they taped it, they stuck everything in there. And I mean, we were there to help them and guide them if they needed it, but they're really so capable. I mean, they could do this project from start to finish on their own. And then this is probably the most similar to what y'all did at Harris County with NASA at my library. One time, again, it rained so much one year, we were inside like every other week of this program. But I did the same thing. I gave them just a bunch of like cardboard and like tape and pipe cleaners and all sorts of random things. And I told them they could make whatever they wanted. So these 4 boys in the middle decided to build as a group, and they made this whole ship that they could actually like fit inside. And then the 2 kids on the sides, like Penelope made a tiny, just like little harmonica thing. I'm not quite sure what it ended up being when she was finished. And then the kid on the right just made a blaster. That's what it was called, he told me. I don't know quite how that worked either, but I think, yeah. And then this is one of the oldest kids we had who spent some of her time helping younger kids, but then she also like just did this on her own. Like she got the whole, and she had the little, yeah, with her rotating latch. I was so impressed. Like, and we didn't do anything. Like she just took all her stuff and went and sat on, like she had her little cardboard cutter and she just got to work. And then 20 minutes later, she was like, Miss Montana, come look at this. And it was awesome. It's so cool that she just created that on her own. So yeah, I'm always impressed with them, with what children can do if you just let them do it.
This
Okay,
is
everyone
so-
can see them correctly, right?
And I real quickly, I'm a librarian at a school for kids with language and communication delays. And then I also have a group called Bayou City Play, and we go into the community and do these loose parts setups. And we usually partner with different organizations, and that's how I connected with Joel at Harris County Public. And so this is a video about the work we do. I don't know if we'll have sound.
I don't know that. Let me know if y'all can hear it.
No.
Okay, hold on. Wait, can you hear the music now or no? Sorry, I think when
Don't worry.
I think when you do your sharing settings, you have to also choose to share sound.
Oh.
Okay, I'm gonna try.
Sorry, you guys, I got booted off and I'm
That's
joining on my
okay.
tablet.
All right, let's try this. Here's quite the first few seconds of the video.
Okay. So I think, just to start off with Bayou City Play, we've worked in so many different environments, and it's how I've become really passionate about the inclusivity of this model because it is so adaptable. We have been in tiny rooms, in libraries and public libraries, and we've been in hospitals, we've been in giant wide open parks, we've been at the zoo, and really, as long as we've got loose parts and open minds, it works. And so I was so excited when I had an opportunity to work with Joel with Harris County Public, because we were in a different location pretty much several times a week. So I can let Joel take it from here to describe some of what we did.
So we had one of the NASA grants that were from ALA. And so when we implemented the grant and some of the programming that it funded, we asked, we gave the kids an assignment in order to connect it to NASA and science and STEM learning. which all of that kind of learning is happening simultaneous with everything else. And that's a great thing about these kind of programs. So their job was to build to colonize a space colony. And so they could either work in teams or individually. And we have many occasions where they teamed up with whole other families and created even superstructures and shelters. And their assignment was to protect a glow in the dark ping pong ball from UV rays. And so they also had to think about where's my window going to be? Can I use it? Can I use the flap as a shade to protect my ping pong ball? And they made tents and all different sorts of things out of just cardboard and tape. I do have to remind people, let the grown-ups be the ones that hold the sharp instruments, any scissors and razor blades that you might have. And make sure to that way there's a sharing of them, because also, some families will bogart the whole the resource and not let anybody else use them. And then we also made sure to let them know it's not a race, it's not a contest. They're not going to be judged on how good or how beautiful their structure might be, or how fast they quickly get it, because a lot of kids wanted to hoard all the material. And so that we also initiated ways to say, hey, can I have some of this, or can I share with you? Can I borrow? And gave them the words to do that. So that way they had an ability to also participate that way.
Mhm.
Yeah. I chose this picture because it shows parents both participating and hanging out in the back, kind of. And you kind of wonder, oh, what should I do with the parents? This is a great time for them to also network or to also interact with their own child or other people's children. And it's a really wonderful intergenerational experience.
Yeah, I think sometimes, I was thinking about this the other day, sometimes we think of parallel play as something that only very young children do, but this is events like this are another situation in which that may be a very common type of interaction, and it's still a totally valid form of play, even with older children, which I think is really wonderful and something we don't think about very often.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And I think, whatever level of participation people choose is also, and kind of setting that tone is really important. And Joel was really good at that. And we were careful to do that at the very beginning, that, making it clear that our expectations were that they would enjoy themselves and try and explore, that we didn't have expectations that there would be a specific product. It's important.
And any challenges that came up, like who could build the highest, who could build the biggest, or whatever, that sort of thing, those superlative qualifications, the kids made that up. It wasn't because I said, you got to make the tallest thing, or that a parent said, your structure has to be the tallest one out there. The kids made that up because they said, one kid said, I have to have a radio tower. How am I going to communicate back with Earth? So I thought that is clever.
Yeah, y'all have similar pictures. I'm just kind of going through everything y'all have here. Because you did this in multiple locations, right? Like, how many branches or locations did you do your program in? Do you know?
I think we did them in 16 locations.
Yeah.
Because it's so flexible. I was thinking about that with our program. When we first started, we did it in like one small conference room in a storefront that like had kind of an empty parking lot. So we did a bunch of outdoor stuff in a parking lot for a year because our building was under construction. And then the next year we did have a really nice space with the butterfly garden and a little sidewalk with a story walk, which is really nice, but it didn't have to be that way. And we've also done stuff just inside, like just in a plain room with a linoleum floor. So you can really do this anywhere.
So true. I think the other thing about, we've talked about how play and librarianship are really compatible. And I think it really does come from this idea that we trust kids to find the books that they need and want. And I think that it's a pretty natural leap to go to, okay, if your space station looks completely different from somebody else's, or if you choose to make a space outfit instead of a station, we can roll with that. And I think that that's really important. And that's what makes it so flexible and adaptive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff we would bring just fabric of different weights and different qualities. Like we had shiny fabric and we had soft fabric, and but also just sheets, because sheets are great. If they're old sheets, you don't have to worry that they might get drawn on. They might get, holes will be cut in them, and that's all okay. It feels fine. But fabric is another magic thing to bring besides boxes.
And I think someone wrote a note home on.
Yes, this
one.
is such a great one. Basically, Joel, did he write different? He basically said that everyone is included in this. Wasn't there there was a message to say everybody was welcome and included in this space station. And then he wrote the names of some of the people. It was lovely.
That's awesome. I think, oh yeah, here they go. I was gonna say, I think Joel knows a little bit more about this, but this is kind of just further, like, in case you thought that play didn't have a place in the library, there are many, many teak skills that can be incorporated and gained by just letting kids play. Like, they will learn so much if you just let them.
Yes, and we have we have a resource list that we'll supply to you. And at the beginning, I think is it called Pedagogy at Play? There are several websites that we can give you if you need ways to justify this kind of programming. I think that yeah, we have some ways that we can help with that.
You've got to have a language and a vocabulary to not only address your administrators and your branch managers and the people who want serious business happening at the library, and also funders, because they've got to see that this has results, and that the results aren't as quantifiable as how many people made it to the program. The results are, did this child get this skill or have exposure to practicing this skill? And that's going to be part of the story that you tell if you wanted to continue in any of these kind of programs. The TEKS are the Texas standards in education. I'm sure they're different with every state, but this gives you some really good vocabulary to include when you're describing these kind of programs.
Well, and I love, Joel, that you said practice. Like, that's a word that I have adopted as a major part of my vocabulary, that like we very rarely become like experts in something, or we are very rarely ever finished doing something, or like have like accomplished check. And that's very much what we're doing with programs like this, is that it's a constant state of like doing and being and making and practicing, and very, very little of here's this one thing that I made and now we're checking off a box and now we're done. Because we're learning forever, we're making forever, we're practicing things forever. And that's just I find much better, like, helpful mindset to be in when talking about programs like this and incorporating this style of activity into what you're doing at your library.
Right, because no one's going to be an expert when they start. And some of these kids are going to be trying out ideas and experimenting with ideas. And that's exactly what learning is all about. Is we're experimenting and using our natural big six skills. The scientific method is in there, and whether or not this box will balance on this balance beam, that's a science experiment there. And it's very subtle and really kind of hidden in some ways.
Yeah, and like from an inclusivity perspective, the idea is not that like you have made something in this perfect way. The idea is that you are practicing doing something. Sorry, people are trying to come in my office. But that you're doing your best and that you're practicing what you can, right? And that will look different for every child, and that's totally okay.
And I think also adding on to that, it allows kids to use their strengths to, you know, if you aren't dictating the process as well as the product, kids can find the path that comes from their strengths as opposed to the strengths that we might expect. So I think that helps as well.
Yeah, especially talking about like neurotypical versus neurodiverse children, like there are many ways to get to one end place. And this allows them to like pursue that in the way they wish, in the way that comes naturally to them.
Exactly. And we put together, we have a list that's on the webpage, right, Joel, that of titles that we came up with, but here are some that go really well.
We have a few handouts that are going to be on that are already on the CSLP website for diversity inclusion rather. But here's a few that help kids, that these stories show kids using their imagination in building things and creating these sort of imaginary play spaces. Roxaboxen is just a classic, and it was one of the first books I used in a story time. Westlandia, and then the Raft I think is a little bit newer, and then Building Books I think is a recommended title because one child likes to read, the other child likes to build. They figure out how to put that all together. And Boxatech, I think Montana, that one was one that you suggested.
That was a 2x2 pick this past year. It's a very recent book. So, and these are good also, like, especially if you are in a situation where like maybe your library is not quite ready for like full on loose parts, like taking over an entire, you know, like lawn or parking lot with like no specific end goal in sight and just a lot of pieces. I have done a lot of bridge programs where like, we are going to read this book and then do an activity loosely inspired by this book. So you still can start like practicing the idea of like, oh, here are some loose parts. We're going to do some child-directed activity after this, but then you can say like, oh, but we're incorporating it with a specific literacy message, or we're incorporating it with this specific book. And that can help, like if you're not quite ready to dive both feet in, you can bridge here. I have found very helpful. Trying to change the slide. There we go. Yeah, this is another important thing to talk about a lot. What are parents supposed to do?
So one of the things that we found that was really helpful was we would set up kind of a little area with chairs that was an invitation for adults. And without necessarily even having to say it overtly, by making this kind of workspace and sitting space, we found that there were grownups who would congregate to that area and hang out and talk and give their kids the freedom to do what they needed to do. But likewise, there were parents who would join in, and a lot of times we could model if we were close by, we would model kind of light touch interventions. So sort of saying, oh, that's really interesting. How can I help you with that? Instead of saying, is that a space station? Is that where I'm supposed to land with my spaceship? We would say, tell me about it. Tell me about what you're making. So we would sort of model some of that for parents, and we found that they picked it up really quickly. But those two were the big things, was just sort of modeling and then making a comfy place for grownups. And we would joke, we were like, well, grownups need to play too. And sometimes grownups play by chit-chatting. So we would make an area for them do the chit chatting that they needed to do, and a place for kids to, build away.
Yeah, I would say most of my programs, the parents are not invited. We have a lot of volunteers who are on board with this idea of like letting kids take the lead, and just stepping in when they might need to, or the kids might need help with something, especially like that could be a danger to them if it's a sharp object. But sometimes we do a mix. Sometimes parents are there too, but very similar. Like here's kind of a parents area, and then a lot of modeling. I'm just like, and I do that. It's so much, again, it's practice for adults too, of just like, I have had to practice myself over the past couple of years I've been in my library, is doing exactly what you do, Jill. Just say, tell me about it. Tell me what you made. Tell me what's happening here. Instead of, is it this? Oh, I can see that you did this. Like, oh, it looks like a heart. Just be like, oh, there's so many stickers. Like, those are two very different statements, but you have to practice to get in the mindset of responding one way.
We're almost at 2:42 my time in Central. So we have a little bit of time to talk about any questions. I don't see any questions in the chat at the moment. So are there some things that you wanted to like throw in and make sure that people knew about Playwork, and any other tips and tricks that they can anticipate?
I wanted to point to the, we have posted a loose parts manual, and then also a pop-up mini kit. And I found both of those resources really helpful when I was starting out, just because there are all kinds of suggestions, even for ways of framing the programming so that people can feel more comfortable that it is educational. It is important to children's experiences. Kind of knowing that language can be helpful, and some of that is in those toolkits. It's really great, and they're free, so we have the links to them.
Yeah, they are a wealth. I have gone over them quite a bit since we met, and they're amazing. I think my main advice is like, you cannot stress out about this. Like literally the whole point is that you can't do it wrong. Yeah. Right? Like the idea is that you're playing, not that like, oh, we played wrong. What? That's not a thing. That's impossible. So it really is, in my opinion, I have found every time I've tried to do something this, like very low stakes, because the idea is just that you're spending time together, creating things, doing things, which is what libraries are all about.
Definitely.
How did you guys deal with the safety issues of like sharp objects there, or heavy objects that might be in there?
We usually stayed away from heavy stuff. We tried to keep things in the paper, fabric, cardboard realm. That was really helpful. I think when you don't know who's coming, I run an after school program, and we know who's coming. And so we can play around more with heavier materials or more challenging. But when we don't know exactly who's coming and what the skill levels are and what the comfort levels are, we stuck with lightweight materials. And when things needed to be cut, we would do the cutting. So we sort of clipped a cardboard knife onto our pants and would cut the holes. And so there were moments when we felt like we were our main job was hole cutters. But it was amazing when we did how much more opened up to the kids when we could cut those holes. Now, again, if I had the same group of kids coming all the time, like Montana did in one of her groups, we could have them work on safe knife use and all of that. But when we just are seeing them for a one-off, or we aren't sure about ages and all of that, we did not make sharp implements available to people freely.
And with that rule of adults holding on to the sharper instruments and the cutting instruments, the kids had to also figure out, well, how do I make this do what I want it to do?
Yeah.
Like some of them learned that the weakest point in the cardboard box is the seam where the glue. And if I want a bit smaller piece of cardboard, that's where I'm going to tear it apart at. And they learned that from our modeling it and showing them how to do it. And they, I think they learned that if you cut the door in a certain way, they can use the flap without having to reattach it. If you only cut 3 sides of the shape,
Yeah.
and keep one piece of it attached, it'll work great as a door or as an awning in many cases, to open up a window and to build a patio in some cases.
Yeah. And then, oh, another really good tip on tape is that while duct tape is really strong and can hold a lot of things together, a lot of kids can't rip duct tape. So we would do 2 things. We would either use color masking tape, which is really fun and easy to tear, or we would pre-tear duct tape. So we would like line a whole plastic table along the edge with pre-torn pieces of tape, because we like to say, you know, our job wasn't to teach kids, in this case, to teach them the fine motor skill. We just wanted them to get down to the business of playing. And so we tried to sort of, and also that also helps with accessibility. If people are struggling with the fine motor of doing something like that, it's already done.
Montana, how did you get some of your materials for the gardening projects or the outdoor projects?
So basically everything was donated to us. The master gardeners in our county have been amazing. They have donated a ton of their time and also a ton of materials when it came to like needing pots, needing soil, needing seeds, all of that they provided. One of our patrons like works at I think she works at Walmart. And so she was able to do a partnership with us where she donated a lot of like kind of tiny greenhouse seedlings that we could grow. And then we also have applied for grants through the Texas State Library and Archives Commission to get like small greenhouses. And we actually got like 20 little kid-sized gardening kits. So they all had like their own gloves and like shovel and everything. And so we just bought those with a grant. And a local gardening group, actually, when they found out that we were doing the program, reached out and they were like, hey, we want to support you. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, here is an Amazon wish list. We would love anything off of this. And they've supported us as well. So it's a lot of just kind of a little bit of grants, but a lot of community partnerships, honestly. And that's how we've done everything. Like all of our, like when we did our obstacle course, all of that stuff is just like old toys that people have donated, old jump ropes people have donated. All of our cardboard is people are like, do you want boxes? Do you want toilet paper rolls? Do you want old formula containers? And I just say yes. I'm like, sure. I'm like, I'll just put it in a box and we'll get it out and use it for something.
My acquisitions department loved me because I started using up all their boxes that they didn't throw away.
Yes.
And you know, the Baker and Taylor boxes make great forts.
Yes.
And also buying some of these supplies that can be reused over and over again. Like I think throughout our whole series of programming, we only had 50 pool noodles, and some of them got destroyed. Some of them were able to come back.
We did have a question about what happens to the children's creations and after the program. And Joel and I have a great answer to that. We would let the children take them because the material is so low cost. And I think one of the most joyful moments of my adult librarian life was seeing a child try to carry a giant refrigerator box with protruding, tubes coming out of it and covered in tin foil, and just walking out the front door of the library with that was just the sweetest thing.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. I always tell the kids they can take whatever, especially if it is just like cardboard and pool noodles and cupcake liners, like by all means, please take it. But I know when we had the picture I had earlier of the 4 boys who made their project together, they were not all in the same family. So they were asking if they could keep it. And I was like, you may absolutely keep it, but we're not going to keep it at the library. So maybe you want to talk about whose house you might keep it at. So that way you can talk to your adults when they get here about which one of you might take it home. So that was an that was a good conversation we had at the beginning of their project before they built it. And then some kids, also the kids who built small things, they built small things because they thought about the fact that their parents had a small car and they maybe couldn't fit a big thing to take home. So if they wanted to take their thing home, they should just build something that would fit in their lap, which was really smart of them. I was very impressed with like the way that they thought that through logically when I said, you can take it home, but you will have to talk to your adult about that.
Definitely negotiation skills are involved.
Yes.
We had a program out in Clear Lake, which is right next to NASA. And I'm sure this parent was one of the engineers at NASA. When their kids said, can we take it home? He had to say, this is bigger than our car. And had to negotiate with the child, like how to take it apart and so that it could safely get home. I just thought it was really kind of funny.
Great.
I hope there are other questions that are coming up. Is there anything that you might think of also? We talked about the abundance of pool noodles. That's a great thing. We used a lot of recycled material, not just the cardboards, but like plastic bottles and CDs that were being discarded by the library and other materials like that. Again, we got a lot of donations. We asked people for sheets and blankets and pillows, reminding them that these will not come back in the same condition. So if they expected it to come back whole, I did not let them donate that. And so many other materials were just scavenged, I guess is probably the best word. Some of my libraries figured out how to ask their local department stores on how to get some of the big boxes and automobile stores also gave some big boxes. Automobile dealerships rather. They gave
A
some big
great source of boxes are Girl Scouts because of cookie boxes. So when we have done setups for really young kids, when we used to do setups at the Children's Hospital, we would pre-make the Girl Scout cookie boxes into, just by folding them in to themselves, and they were little blocks. And Girl Scout cookie boxes are so many different colors and they're pretty uniform in size. And so right away we had just quick, easy blocks that kids of any sort of physical ability could manipulate and play with. So Girl Scouts.
Did y'all have to make any accommodations for anybody with cognitive or physical disabilities?
Do you mean in the libraries or at
any of the Playwork events or any of the?
Yes, particularly the hospital. We did setups. We partnered with the Children's Hospital for about 3 years up until the pandemic, and there we had to think always about accessibility, and it was multiple levels of accessibility. There were often kids who had just come out of surgery, so we had to figure out, like, could we bring a table over to them on wheels and bring it to them or fit it over their chair. We had to think about things like ports, like not getting, because we would bring things like mushy gushy supplies, and we had to think about, issues of latex allergies or, and with children with cognitive, also kids who had just come out of surgery often were on medications that, would kind of slow their processing down. And so a lot of times what we found is if we kept the materials lightweight and we kept our minds really open, they could get to making things that brought them joy in one way or another. But a lot of it too was not making them do a ton of work to get to the play. And that's why I was saying things like pre-tearing tape, or we would maybe make a setup of stuff so that the kids wouldn't have to put everything on the table themselves. They could get straight to the table and start working right away. Also, like waiting, that patience piece was always really important. Is just sort of knowing that sometimes kids aren't going to take a linear path to what they're wanting to do, and just kind of waiting it out and seeing where that path goes, kind of journeying with them, I guess is the.
Also exactly what I was going to say. I was like the number, like I love Joel, what you were saying about talking to the people who wanted to donate things and saying this is not going to come back the way you think it might. And then like my whole thing all the time is just like managing expectations from the very beginning. And but one of the expectations we have to manage for ourselves as adults is how much time it will take to do something. And so much about like accessibility and inclusivity is literally just be patient and let things happen in the time they will happen in. Like, which is, you just have to have that expectation from the beginning that like, I am going to be patient and we will see how this goes.
Yeah, I love that.
Now, I didn't notice anybody who may have been deaf or blind in our program, so I'm not sure if I had to make any accommodations for any of those things. It was revealed that one child was cognitively challenged, but I didn't know the extent or because he certainly didn't exhibit any problems, and that was a really wonderful thing, and that really showed me how this whole program and how programs based on play could be inclusive of kids with those different abilities and different needs, because certainly we would have been prepared if they needed some sort of accommodation. You know, you kind of have to anticipate, okay, if a child in a wheelchair wants to do this, how do I let them, what accommodations would I need to make in order for them to be accessible, or for the materials to be accessible to that child. And again, because there's so many social skills involved too, anybody who might have some social challenges gets to practice asking for stuff, negotiating. Someone in the comments said negotiation skills. There are many social skills going on, communication, and it's just the interaction with other people. And I really like to point out there was a lot of intergenerational and whole family communication and interaction, and that's kind of what we wanted to support. This was, and then like two families got together and built, some of these superstructures. So anyway.
Well, and that, Joel, is exactly like another way, like how this is totally in line with the library's mission too of intergenerational. Is like libraries are community centers, right? Like we're serving everyone. We're not just like siloing children off into their own room and being like, you go have your one program that's just for kids and that's it. Like we want to do things that can incorporate an entire community, like every age and every ability. So it's really fantastic to do things like this that can be like kids, parents, grandparents, neighbors, friends, anyone.
But we are now at the 3 o'clock hour in Central Time. If there are any other questions, you can certainly email us or go to the CSLP website, CSLP inclusion, CSLP.com. I'm sorry, CSLPreads.org/inclusion. That's the new website page or web page that's there, and many of these handouts are going to be there. Our bibliographies, our title selections, and other resources that are you would find probably valuable. Thank you, CSLP, for posting that that link on the chat, and we are completely available. Montana's at a public library, and Jill is at the Parish School, and our contact information is at the beginning of the slideshow, and our slideshow is already loaded up to that page. So if you want to go there, you can do that. So thank you, Jill. Thank you, Montana.
Thank you. And thank you, CSLP. We love to talk about play. So please ask us anything you ever want.
Definitely.
So, and thank you, CSLP. I'm going to sign off, and this has been a really great time to work with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.